This story is kind of how I started my show Death Wish on Amazon Prime. This is before I had the show. It was an experience I had that made me realize there was something here. My buddy and I quit our jobs and toured the country in a school bus for half a year. On that trip, we found this 1977 Toyota Hilux abandoned in the desert of Phoenix. Been abandoned there for 15 years. And for years, we had gone back there every year to try to get it, try to own it. And a handful of years ago, my buddy Doug, he was able to acquire it. And I just happened to be in Las Vegas doing some shock tuning on some desert cars for the Mint 400. And he messaged me, he goes, dude, I just bought it. $250. We got to get it running. So I left the Mint and I went down there for this 77 Hilux. And, we got it all running. We didn't put a bunch of money or parts. We put a bunch of effort in. And the idea was I was going to drive it back home to New Hampshire from Phoenix in stock form. We didn't change the oil, and this thing's been sitting in the desert. It's a desert truck its whole life. So all the rubber is all dry rotted. The windows rattle in the tracks. Like everything makes noise. And it barely has enough power to do 60 miles an hour. Like 65 is it. When I'm getting ready to leave, my buddy Doug has a bus with a plethora of tools to choose from. His bus is super reliable. This truck has never driven anywhere. I'm like, hey, can I take some tools? And he was stingy with the tools. He was like, hey, sure, why don't you take this Phillips head screwdriver, these vice grips, the truck comes with a tire iron with a flathead on the back, and how about 4 zip ties? I'm like, you have a whole toolbox. Whatever, I'm not gonna need it anyway. And I left Phoenix, and the gas gauge didn't work. So I ended up somewhere near Sedona looking for gas, and I ended up in Sedona. And I'm doing that climb up 89A, beautiful road, like canyons, switchbacks, and it feels like you're on Mars, all the big red rocks and stuff. It's kind of making noise. I can't really tell. I think it's like a 7,000 foot climb or something like that. And I'm just pulling into Flagstaff. And my mind is trying to diagnose this truck as I'm driving. And it's like making a ticky noise. And I just can't figure out if it's important or not. And then I realize, I'm like, you know what? The oil's probably not changed in this. I bet you it needs a valve adjustment. Like, I'll change the oil, I'll do a valve adjustment, and I pulled over on an off-ramp, right there in the off-ramp with my limited toolkit. I was able to do a valve adjustment. And this is how I did it. I was able to get the valve cover off with the vice grips on the nuts. I had the flat end of the pry bar to twist the adjusters. And then I found a beer can in the ditch, which I happen to know is roughly 3 to 3.5 thousandths thick. So 2 layers did the intake and 3 layers did the exhaust. And that was the specs for a Toyota 20R engine. And I just have these specs in my head. So I just knew all of this worked. So on the side of the road, I did a valve adjustment with a beer can and a tire iron. I got all back together and it wasn't really any better. I went to O'Reilly's, which is a couple miles up. Went to do an oil change. I tried to catch the oil, but essentially I spilled it all over the ground and just asked for forgiveness. And I hit the road. I was like 2 hours away from where I started. It took me probably 4 hours to get there, but I was roughly 2 hours from where I started. And I had the opportunity to turn around and go back to Phoenix and come up with a new plan. But I decided to press on. I was like, I have a high level of self-efficacy, which means I don't necessarily know how I'm going to do it, but I trust in my ability to adapt and overcome. I headed off into the desert towards Albuquerque, and it's getting late. I pull into a hotel because if you sleep in the hotel parking lot, you can get free continental breakfast. And so I slept in the truck, and when I woke up, it was 16 degrees out. The inside of the cab was froze over, and I had to walk into the hotel pretending like I just had a nice restful night in this hotel, and I sat next to a police officer who I think was also doing the theft of services, eating that continental breakfast. I took off. I think the town I made it to was like Santa Rosa before I really had troubles. I'd been driving down the road and this rattle was like annoying. Everything rattles in this thing. The thing shakes, it rattles, and I had leaned my knee against the shifter and the rattle went away as soon as I put tension against it. I was like, oh, okay, well, it's just that plastic cup at the bottom of the shift ball. No big deal. And it's resonating through the driveline. Well, I made it to Santa Rosa and I was like, that knocking, rattling noise is so bad. And so I leaned my knee against the shifter and one of the rattles went away, but the really annoying one didn't. I was like, oh no, that's not good. So I pull into this town because there was a billboard that said Dinosaur Museum. And I was like, if I'm going to be blown up, I might as well enjoy myself. I stopped at a couple of different parts stores and I was like, can you got some of the senior employees? I was like, can you guys come out here and listen to this thing and tell me it's not what I think it is? And everybody was like, nope, that's it. I diagnosed it as a wrist pin knock. So like not end of the world, but definitely not good. So I'm searching Marketplace, but this little town didn't really have anything. I would have bought something if it was something cool, like flat toe this thing, but I'm not going to buy just anything. So I found in Amarillo, which was like 120 miles away, that there was a guy selling an identical truck. And in the ad, it mentioned the presence of a parts truck. And I was like, okay, maybe that parts truck has an engine. I called the guy. I was like, listen, this is my situation. I was like, maybe I'll buy your truck that you have for sale, but what I'm really interested in is, does that parts truck have an engine? He said it does have one, and he's never heard it run, but the guy he got it from says it runs. I was like, sweet. Can I work a deal to use your tools or facility to work on my truck? And he's like, yeah, sure. So it was $300 for the engine, $100 to use his tools. So $400. He was like, yeah, I'll be here if you can get here. 120 miles away with a wrist pin knock. The only way to potentially have this thing survive is to drive it under full engine load, which is either ride the brakes for 120 miles, which isn't sustainable, or do full throttle, full decel, full throttle, full decel for 120 miles in top gear. And it didn't rattle between idle and like 1200 RPM. So I had to keep it between there. So it ended up being like 25 to 30 miles an hour. And it took me roughly 5.5 hours, maybe 6 hours to make it 120 miles at 30 miles an hour. And now I'm going that slow and I can't drive on I-40 because like that's one, dangerous and I'm going to get busted. So I had to get off of the interstate and it put me on this desolate dirt road. And for 80 miles, you could have dropped me in the middle of the ocean. I would have the exact same view in every direction. There was nothing out there. And I got a truck that's almost blown up. I've got no cell service. There's no telephone lines, no houses, no nothing. I got stolen pocket fruit and half a bottle of water. So I did end up making it to this guy's house, this Craigslist stranger danger. His name was Joe True. I talked to him on the phone. He was like, yeah, just pull on around back, pull right in. I got the door open for you. And I didn't know if he had like a shop or a gravel driveway or what he had, but he actually had a super nice like home hobby shop. So we pull it in there. And when I shut it off, it was like, just done. It was like a movie. I couldn't have planned it any better. So now I'm looking at the parts truck that he's never heard run. He goes, somebody said it runs. Now the journey begins because I've got a truck that's done and I'm really far away from anybody I know. Not only did he let me use his tools, he stayed up all night with me and worked just as hard as I did to help me swap this engine in. We swapped the carburetor and stuff over onto the new head and block, and we were done at 4:30 in the morning. And it ran like crap, but so did the other one. I had to pick up a friend at the Dallas airport it was Thursday at 3:30 in the afternoon, and I left Phoenix Tuesday at noon. While I'm driving between Amarillo and Dallas, the tread from one of my million-year-old tires comes completely off. It didn't go flat, but it turned into like a balloon with no lateral stability, and it was all over the road. I was able to use the power of social media to arrange a new set of tires basically off an on-ramp. And I only lost like a half hour. I pulled up to the airport terminal 3 minutes after she stepped out onto the concrete. Like this was a 2-3 day journey, flat out, everything I could do to make it there. And I made it there perfectly on time. We did our thing that we had to do in Dallas, but then I ran down to Houston because I have friends down there. And that's what I thought my excuse was. I'm close. I'm going to go see my friends. Close is still, 4 hours away? So logically, it doesn't make a lot of sense. But I went down there to go see my friends. When I pull into Houston, this thing is like puking oil like crazy. It's going to cost me a lot of oil to get the last 2,000 miles home. It's puking coolant all over the windshield. And it runs like crap. There's a backstory beyond this where I had a bad client at my shop. The relationship went sour. And I was building the same truck, except it was going to be super wide body. I had a tube chassis built for it. It was going to be LS swapped. It's going to be a badass little truck. When the relationship went sour, I had a lot of spite. And I recognized I was driving the same truck. And I have the opportunity to dig him with a knife a little bit. I asked my buddy in Houston, I was like, hey, can I like use your barn for a couple of days? I want to put a Crown Vic front and rear end in this truck. Like make it wide, make it look cool. And that way there, like I could finish the build of the client with the relationship that went sour and just like a silent middle finger. And he was like, yeah, sure, man. I'm in this barn and I had to drive around for a day or two to try to get materials and supplies. This is the only vehicle I have to get around with, so I have to get everything before I start. So I lived in the fornicatorium, which was it was a tool room in the barn. That's what everybody called it. The old man who owned this place, he dresses the whole place up like it's a horror movie set. Like he'll set tripwires and like dolls will fall out of the ceiling hanging from a rope with glitter bombs and there's like spray paint and like spooky stuff everywhere. He's just a little bit out there. So the fornicatorium is this tool room and it's got like all of these like antique artifacts and stuff in it. And it's like he worked at NASA and he's got like all these just weird memorabilia and creepy old clocks and stuff. And on one of the shelves is like a single size air mattress. Now I'm here staying in this fornicatorium. The old man's wife, Sinbad was her name, was difficult to read and everybody thought she was evil. She wasn't allowed to know that I was staying there. So I had to hide from the lady who owned the barn while I'm living in her barn with a truck that's cut in half and no body on it. Because I pulled the body off it, I cut the frame in half so I could build a new front half and put the Crown Vic thing in. But now I've got this thing sitting on Crown Vic suspension and I have to build motor mounts. I'm like, well, if I'm building motor mounts, damned if I'm building motor mounts for an engine that runs like crap and is puking oil and coolant everywhere. Like, build motor mounts for a real engine. So I went and picked up a 5.3. And so we stuffed an LS engine in there. And now the engine's sticking out of the hood. The tires are completely outside the body. And it looks super rowdy. At this point, I've been here for a month and a half. I've been living in this barn where like it turned into the spot that everybody came after work to watch Josh work. And I made a bunch of friends. These people turned out to be incredible people. I actually ended up in one of their weddings. So we get this truck finally like it looks like a vehicle again. It's got the running gear in it, engine's mounted. I had to build a whole new firewall and floor for it because bigger engine. And my buddy came over and he goes, dude, this thing's so wide and engine's sticking out of the hood. It's rowdy. What this thing needs is a turbo. And I was like, no, dude, I have a shop. I need to get back to work. So the next day he comes over with a turbo, a wastegate, blow off, like all the things. He goes, you can have it if you put it on. Like, can't not. That's like double dare you, you know? We ended up putting a turbo on it. So now I've got a boosted LS wide body 70s mini truck. Everybody who helped me out of the kindness of their heart and expected nothing in return, I had them sign the B-pillar with a Sharpie. When I left, the first 200 miles, I had to stop 35 times to fix or diagnose this thing. So it took several days. Through that, I met countless strangers who just wanted nothing more than to help, to be part of something greater than themselves. Like, people want to help, you need to give them the opportunity to help. At the end of this journey, this truck had so many signatures on the B-pillar, you almost couldn't find a place to write something else. It's cool art, but it's a memorial for every time that I've been broke down and was restored through the kindness of a stranger is commemorated on the back of this truck. So this was a middle finger to a bad client. And like, I hate that I keep talking about that because like that's well dead and gone at this point. But it is a key element in the creation story of my show Death Wish. It's like that was the driving force, was I existed out of spite because I was so upset at this guy. He was like a close friend of mine and turned into not a close friend of mine. I couldn't have stabbed him any harder and twisted that knife because like it was this vehicle and this story had been featured by almost every single major media outlet there is. We're talking about, Netflix and Hoonigan and Speed Society and it's top-down modeling, and everybody pulls their content from these opinion leaders. So it was everywhere. Then we ended up buying that original truck and finishing it. We built a tube chassis, we cut it down the center, widened it 16 inches, and put a power stroke in it. And the test drive was a 2,200 mile road trip. So I won 1,000 times over. So I hate the fact that I have to keep bringing up this guy because I just want to let him live in peace and I don't want to keep stabbing him. But like, man, thanks for the motivation.
Whether you see the car in person or buy it sight unseen, when you buy a pre-owned car, you need to get an inspection done by a qualified professional. And the nationwide network of trained inspectors from the Lemon Squad is the best way to accomplish that. They give you a great deal and a great bit of information about any car you're looking at very quickly. They've been supporting VINwiki now for 2 years, and I use them personally because when I'm buying a car, I need to know the full story. So check them out now at the link in the description below and use the code VINwiki for 10% off, and never buy a used car without the Lemon Squad. Car, make sure to use the Lemon Squad.